For a while now, PC gamers have been able to nab some quality cave titles via Steam, allowing bullet hell fans to get some decent time in on some of the world's best Danmaku shooting games. But what if you've done all you can within these titles? Could there be more?
The answer might just lie in an indie shmup known as Moth DX, released to Steam in January of 2016. Taking heavy inspiration from Cave's earlier titles, Moth DX definitely walks the walk. But does it have what it takes to really hang with the masters of the genre? Let's take a closer look.
Moth DX takes a very simple approach to its gameplay, all while mimicking the kind of mechanics and feature mainstays Cave has become famous for. 8-way movement, a button for rapid shots, a button for concentrated lasers, which halves movement, and a bomb button are all players need to get the job done.
The Space Moth also has a tiny hitbox relative to its larger size, another mainstay seen in many Danmaku shooters. As for the Yuge, players will only take damage if the small spot is hit by bullets. If a player is hit, they will either launch an autobomb, sacrificing the whole bomb stock, or bite it if either no bombs are left or if autobomb is disabled on the outset of the game.
Here's where the gameplay takes a bit of a twisty twist. As players shoot larger enemies with their rapid shot, these foes will begin to flash. With even more fire, their colors will morph into neon versions, which will increase the enemy's aggressiveness. It may seem inconsequential, as they will simply die if rapid shots are continued, and they can be wasted fairly easily with laser fire before they switch, but this also factors into scoring, which we'll get into in a second.
Another neat feature to taking out enemies is something known as aura damage. While firing your laser, your Space Moth will be enveloped in a fiery aura that can also damage enemies faster than only hitting them with your beam. This allows for damage through straight-line bullet patterns that can sometimes be tricky to avoid while taking aimed fire from other foes into consideration.
At the end of each stage resides your typical giant boss creature, which has a health gauge representing its life on both the top and the bottom of the screen. These bosses all have some really intense fire patterns that can make quick work of a careless or novice player, so practice is probably a good thing to get under your belt before trying to get through, even for survival.
The main reason for this is that one simply doesn't continue in Moth DX. If a player chooses to go on, they will return to a save state that is recorded by the game, either at stage start or at the stage boss. Position, lives, and bombs remaining are all restored, but once again, careless playing can make for a frustrating, always last-ditch struggle situation, especially if your bombs have been auto-bombed away beforehand. Of course, your score is also nuked.
That said, the overall difficulty in Moth DX is pretty intense. It's actually a bit too much in a lot of cases, since most of the bigger bullet curtain patterns are also aimed directly at the player, punishing those who move too much with a hopelessly complex, crisscrossing swarm of bullets that either ends up wasting your whole bomb stock or just killing you outright. There's also no novice-friendly difficulties to select from, outside of the hard standard Space Moth mode and the even more ridiculous DX mode.
This will obviously result in a lot of replay to get the feel for bullets and aimed patterns, but it also means that Space Moth isn't especially suitable for beginners. In a lot of cases though, no matter the input method, we never really felt as if we were in 100% control when dodging some of the more intense waves. Space Moth's movement is a bit too quick by default, a bit too slow when firing lasers, and the hitbox is a bit too unforgiving when traversing tight spaces.
Its bright, inviting appearance makes Moth DX seem safe enough, but runs a fine line between being challenging and beating away more casual players with a heavy stick. Its staying power may suffer as a result. For those with the skill though, unlockable ships through a 1cc, a ton of hidden secrets, and an interesting twist in scoring awaits. Moth DX has a simple but satisfying score system that appears at first to be kinda worthless because of how small its bonuses appear. A quick glance up to the corner, though, shows that the overall score counter starts with 6 digits, so a score in the millions is either rare or impossible. 300 can be a pretty decent bonus in this respect, and, if I'm totally honest, more games should probably scale this type of thing back, really. Games from Cave, for example, will go into the billions at least, and GigaWing has score numbers that I'm not even sure what to call.
Scoring higher in Moth DX hinges on 3 main factors. First is soul-draining larger enemies with the Space Moth's rapid shot to turn them into a more aggressive neon form. When converted to neon, shooting the enemy will reward the player with a gold bonus score, indicated by a small chime effect. Of course, dealing with a ton of fire at all times makes this pretty difficult, so playing for survival to get the hang of each stage is probably a good idea before going headlong into this bonus factor.
Secondly, special items will appear through various means as players go through each stage. These special items can be collected if shot with concentrated laser fire, which makes them grow. They're definitely random if nothing else. Cats, kettles, apples, chocolate bars, butterflies, snakes, sunny-side-up eggs. You know, a ton of random junk. There's no real way to tell exactly what has been collected through the game, though. But for each one you get without a death or auto-bomb miss of any kind, they will increase by a score of 100 points. Get 7 in a row, get 700 extra points.
Finally, there are also other bonuses that factor into a stage end score. Most notably, killing the boss off before the timer runs out will award the player points. But if a player can kill a boss with 2 seconds or less remaining on the clock, another special bonus is also awarded. The stage end result also shows how many of the possible soul drainable enemies have been disposed of in their neon forms, and how many special items have been collected in the stage.
It's nothing too complex in the end, which is probably all well and good for the amount of effort that's inherently required to even survive. It's a shame then that online leaderboards don't exist for Space Moth DX, with only local scoring available. This may very well give some players less incentive to return. Space Moth DX is a game that does a good job of evoking the kind of 80s vibe you'd get from an old arcade game with its vibrant colors and very retro 80s synth-heavy OST. But there are also a couple things that bug us about the audio and visual aspects of the game.
Visually, Space Moth looks pretty great. It has all of the kinds of enemies you'd expect from a game revolving around a space-bound moth with all kinds of big, vibrantly colored foes and giant stage-end bosses that, all told, are pretty cool.
On the other hand, there isn't especially much in the line of animation for the most part. The blood splats from felled bugs is a little choppy, and bullet impacts are basically scaled still images that kind of look like the fire pieces you'd find in a Lego set.
Meanwhile, the soundtrack does a good job of making the game sound whimsical, again with a synth that sounds right from an 80s synthesizer bank. The sound effects are all serviceable as well, with nothing hitting our ears in any sort of offensive way.
Some of the sound effects, like the bug splats once again, are a bit on the weedy side. Of course, we can't expect every indie outfit to have the sound design of, say, Mushihime-sama Futari, but a little more oomph could have been used in some of the effects. The music could have used a bit more percussion too, but otherwise it's fairly good.
The UI is serviceable, the border is nifty, and Tate mode is also present for those that want a more pure vertical gameplay experience. There are even scanline options for arcade purists. Steam trading cards are also present, but no achievements make Space Moth DX even lighter on overall content.
I really want to like Space Moth DX more than I actually do. It's just a shame that it's so light on actual content and so heavy-handed towards new and even intermediate players. How does it actually stack up though? Let's take a look. Space Moth DX controls fairly well, but ends up being a bit too fast on one end and a bit too slow on the other.
Your Space Moth's hitbox can sometimes be really fussy in tight spaces too.
Space Moth DX is spitefully hard to the point that high-level intermediate and advanced players only really need apply.
But it still might be a good trial by fire for newly serious players looking to push their limits through the gauntlet.
With 5 stages and very few extras, Space Moth DX's overall length suffers.
A lot of the replay here exists mostly by way of player practice sessions.
Great pixel art translates to 1080p nicely with all sorts of neat bugs and creatures to fight.
A bit more animation would have been nice on, well, more or less everything though.
The OST here is chill and relaxed too, perhaps in too stark a way when compared to the action on screen. Still really good though.
All sound effects are also serviceable, but some lack a bit of punch.
Space Moth DX doesn't depart from your typical Danmaku conventions much at all. Aimed and tracked heavy bullet curtains are kind of a party foul though.
The neat soul drain mechanic is still pretty engaging and should prove fairly fun when players master survival.
In the end, Space Moth DX is one of those deceptively hardcore games that you never really expect to be so brutally killed by on the outset. If you're looking for a super tough game outside of your typical cave fare though, this game might be a good choice. That said, Space Moth DX gets a 3.5 out of 5. You can get a copy of Space Moth DX on Steam today for about $6 US.